My mother-in-law faked terminal cancer to destroy. My marriage. The phone call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Sarah's voice was shaking when she woke me up, her hand trembling as she held the phone to her ear. Her mother, Linda, was on the other end, sobbing about test results and oncologists and 6 months to live. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, she said. Terminal. Inoperable. I watched my wife of 3 years crumble in real time. Sarah had always been close to her mother, maybe too close, if I'm being honest. Linda had this way of inserting herself into our marriage decisions, from where we should live to when we should have kids. But this was different. This was death knocking at the door. The next morning, Sarah was packing a bag to drive the 4 hours to her childhood home in Albany. Linda needed her, she said. The doctors wanted to start aggressive treatments immediately. I offered to come with her, to take time off work, but Sarah hesitated. Her mother had specifically asked to speak with her alone first. Just for the initial consultation, she explained. I could come next weekend. That should have been my first red flag, but grief makes people act strangely. I kissed Sarah goodbye and promised to drive up that Friday. The weekend visit was when things started feeling off. Linda looked tired, sure, but not like someone with stage 4 cancer. She was moving around fine, cooking elaborate meals, even pruning her rose bushes. When I mentioned this to Sarah later, she got defensive. Her mother was trying to stay positive, she said. The doctors encouraged maintaining normal activities as long as possible. But it was during dinner that Sunday when Linda brought up her bucket list. She wanted to see Sarah settled and secure before she passed. Really settled, she emphasized, looking directly at me across her dining room table. She'd been thinking about what kind of future Sarah would have, whether she'd be financially stable, emotionally supported. The conversation felt strange but not alarming, just a worried mother expressing concerns about her daughter's future. It wasn't until later that I realized Linda was planting seeds. Update. Looking back, I should have trusted my gut feeling that something was off. The signs were there from day one. But who questions a cancer diagnosis? Have you ever ignored red flags because the situation seemed too serious to doubt? Over the next month, Linda's condition became the center of our universe. Sarah was driving to Albany every weekend, sometimes staying through Tuesday. She'd come home emotionally drained, full of updates about treatment options and second opinions from specialists in Rochester and Syracuse. But here's where things got weird. Every time I offered to help, to drive Sarah up there, to research treatment centers, to speak with doctors, Linda had a reason why it wasn't necessary. She was embarrassed about her appearance after chemo, she said. The doctors were limiting visitors to immediate family only. She didn't want to burden me with medical appointments. Sarah defended every decision. Her mother was proud, she explained. She didn't want to seem weak in front of her son-in-law. It was a generational thing, Sarah insisted. Older women often preferred handling medical issues privately. The requests for money started small. Linda needed help with prescription copays. $200 here, $400 there. Insurance was being difficult about covering experimental treatments. Then came the bigger expenses. A special air purifier for her bedroom because chemo made her sensitive to allergens, wanting $200. Organic meal delivery service because she couldn't keep regular food down, $400 a week. Each request came with medical explanations that sounded legitimate. Sarah would forward me articles about cancer treatment, highlighting sections about how important air quality and nutrition were for patient outcomes. She'd done research, she said. These weren't luxuries, they were necessities. But I started noticing inconsistencies. Linda never seemed to lose weight. Her voice was strong during phone calls. When I suggested visiting during the week to help with appointments, Sarah always had an excuse. Her mother was having a bad week. The doctors had rescheduled. Maybe next month when treatment stabilized. 3 months in, Linda made her boldest move yet. She called Sarah one evening, crying about how guilty she felt about being a financial burden. She'd been thinking about life insurance policies, she said, about what would happen to Sarah after she was gone. Had Sarah ever considered whether she'd be okay financially as a widow? That's when Linda brought up David Richardson, a successful real estate developer from Buffalo who'd recently lost his own wife to cancer. Linda had met his family through a support group, she said. Such a nice man, financially stable, looking for someone who understood loss. Maybe after Linda passed, Sarah might consider meeting him, just as friends initially. Sarah was horrified at the suggestion. She was married, she reminded her mother. She loved me. But Linda planted the seed expertly. What if something happened to me, too? Shouldn't Sarah be with someone who could truly take care of her? The marriage counseling session happened in November. Sarah spent the entire hour talking about anticipatory grief and caregiver burnout. When our therapist, Dr. Martinez, gently suggested that major life decisions shouldn't be made during family health crises, Sarah bristled. She accused both of us of not understanding the pressure she was under. By December, Sarah was distant and distracted. She'd gotten a part-time job at a medical billing company, ironic considering what I'd learn later, to help pay for Linda's mounting expenses. We were maxing out credit cards, draining our savings, but every time I suggested reviewing the medical bills or talking to Linda's doctors directly, Sarah shut down the conversation. The breaking point came during Christmas week. Linda called, sobbing about how she might not see another holiday season. She didn't want to die knowing she'd caused financial problems in Sarah's marriage. Maybe it would be better if Sarah could start fresh after Linda passed, find someone who could truly provide security. 2 weeks later, Sarah asked for a separation. The private investigator wasn't my idea initially. My brother Jake suggested it. After I'd spent New Year's Eve alone, wondering what the hell had happened to my marriage. Jake had gone through his own messy divorce and knew how these things could spiral. "Something doesn't add up," he said over beers at our usual dive bar. "Healthy people don't just get stage 4 pancreatic cancer and then maintain their normal activities for 6 months. I hired Marcus Webb from a firm in downtown Syracuse, former police detective, specialized in insurance fraud and background investigations. He charged $150 an hour plus expenses, which felt like a fortune on my newly single budget. But I needed answers. Marcus started with basic surveillance. 3 weeks of watching Linda's daily routine, documenting her activities and physical capabilities. What he found was disturbing. The woman who was supposedly dying of cancer was shopping at Wegmans 3 times a week, attending water aerobics at the community center, and volunteering at the animal shelter. He recorded her lifting 40-pound bags of dog food during one volunteer shift. Her emergency hospital visit the previous month coincided with her book club's discussion of a medical thriller. The timing wasn't coincidental. But the real breakthrough came through insurance records. Marcus had contacts at several major health insurers from his police days. What he discovered made my stomach drop. Linda had been filing claims for various medical conditions for the past 2 years. Not just cancer, but fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, and something called chronic inflammatory response syndrome. The total payouts were approaching $75,000. But here's where it got really sophisticated. Linda wasn't just lying about having cancer. She was using documentation from real medical facilities. Marcus tracked down 3 of the doctors whose names appeared on her paperwork. One had treated her for routine blood pressure medication. Another had seen her for a mammogram screening that came back normal. The third had moved to Florida 8 months earlier. The fake medical records were convincing, but not perfect. Professional letterhead, believable symptoms, proper medical terminology. But when Marcus compared them to authentic documents from the same facilities, subtle differences emerged. Font variations, spacing inconsistencies, outdated logos. Linda's method became clear when Marcus found her source. She'd been volunteering at Albany Medical Center for 3 years, working in the administrative wing. She had access to blank letterhead, knew the proper format for medical reports, and understood insurance coding well enough to create believable documentation. The smoking gun came from a different angle entirely. Sarah had given me access to our joint laptop when she moved out, saying I could keep it since she'd bought a new one. While reviewing our financial records for divorce proceedings, I found something that made my blood run cold. Buried in the browser history were dozens of searches: pancreatic cancer survival rates, how to fake medical records, insurance, fraud detection methods, and convincing cancer symptoms. The searches dated back 8 months, 2 months before Linda's supposed diagnosis. But the most damaging evidence was simpler than I expected. Sarah had installed a cloud backup service on our laptop that automatically synced documents. In that backup folder, I found a PDF titled Mom's Research that Sarah had apparently saved from Linda's email. The document was a timeline: Linda's cancer announcement, Sarah's emotional response, my growing suspicions, the financial strain on our marriage. Next to each event were notes about influence opportunities and strategic responses. Under my name, there was a note: remove resistance to daughter's future prospects. Marcus helped me understand what we were looking at. Linda hadn't just decided to fake cancer for insurance money. She'd been planning to manipulate Sarah's marriage as part of a larger scheme. The cancer story served 2 purposes: financial gain from insurance fraud and emotional leverage to control Sarah's life choices. When Marcus showed me photos of Linda meeting with David Richardson at a coffee shop in Buffalo, the full picture became clear. She wasn't just destroying my marriage randomly. She was actively arranging Sarah's next relationship. David Richardson wasn't some grieving widower from a support group. He was a business contact who'd paid Linda a finder's fee for introducing him to eligible women. Update. Confronting Sarah with this evidence was the hardest conversation I've ever had. How do you tell someone their dying mother is actually running a con game that includes selling them to the highest bidder? The truth destroyed her even more than it destroyed our marriage. I met Sarah at our old coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where we'd had countless good conversations before everything fell apart. She looked exhausted when she walked in, thinner than I remembered, stress aging her in ways that made my heart ache despite everything. I started with the financial records, the insurance claims, the timeline Marcus had constructed. Sarah's initial reaction was exactly what I expected. Complete denial, anger that I'd hired someone to investigate her family, accusations that I was trying to sabotage her mother's final months. But when I showed her the browser history from our laptop, something shifted in her expression. The searches for how to fake medical records were time-stamped. The document titled Mom's Research was saved to her own account. The evidence was coming from her own computer. She asked me to research treatment options, Sarah whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. She wanted to understand her prognosis better. Then I showed her the photos of Linda with David Richardson, the coffee shop meetings, the exchange of what looked like paperwork, the friendly body language between two people who supposedly met through a cancer support group. Sarah stared at the surveillance photos for a long time. When she finally looked up, her face was completely white. "She's not dying," she said, more to herself than to me. "She's not even sick." The phone call to Linda happened right there in the coffee shop. Sarah demanded an explanation, her voice shaking as she read details from Marcus's investigation. I could hear Linda's responses getting increasingly defensive, her tone shifting from weak and fragile to sharp and calculating. The conversation lasted 20 minutes and ended with Sarah hanging up and sitting in stunned silence. "She said you fabricated everything," Sarah told me. "She said you hired someone to doctor photos and forge documents because you wanted to prevent her from getting proper medical care." But the doubt was already there. Sarah called Linda's supposed oncologist directly from the coffee shop. The receptionist had no record of Linda as a patient. Sarah called the hospital where Linda claimed to be receiving chemotherapy. No treatment scheduled under her name. The police investigation moved quickly once we turned over Marcus's evidence. Linda was arrested at her house 4 days later, still maintaining her innocence, even as officers found boxes of blank medical letterhead and insurance forms in her basement. The district attorney's office was particularly interested because Linda's scheme crossed state lines. She'd been filing claims with insurers in New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. Federal prosecutors got involved when they discovered the identity theft components of her fraud. Sarah moved back into our house temporarily while trying to process what had happened. We weren't reconciling. Too much damage had been done for that, but she needed somewhere safe to figure out her next steps. Watching her grapple with the realization that her mother had manipulated her into destroying her marriage was devastating. The worst part for Sarah was discovering David Richardson's role. Linda had been essentially pimping out her own daughter, arranging introductions with men who paid for access to high-quality women from good families. Sarah had been a commodity in her mother's business model. Linda's trial lasted 4 months. The evidence was overwhelming: financial records, fake documents, witness testimony from defrauded insurance companies. She was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for wire fraud, mail fraud, and identity theft. 18 months later, my life looks completely different. Sarah and I finalized our divorce amicably. She kept the house, I kept my retirement accounts, and we both kept the hard-earned knowledge about recognizing manipulation. She's in therapy and slowly rebuilding her relationship with the family members who tried to warn her about Linda's behavior over the years. I moved to Portland for a new job opportunity. The marketing firm specializes in healthcare communications, which feels ironically appropriate. The salary is better, the city is beautiful, and I've met someone who makes me laugh in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Rebecca is a nurse practitioner who works with actual cancer patients. When I told her Linda's story, she wasn't surprised by the medical fraud. She'd seen families devastated by similar schemes, but she was amazed that I'd fought for the truth instead of just accepting the divorce and moving on. Linda is currently serving her sentence at a federal facility in Pennsylvania. She'll be eligible for parole in 5 years. Sarah visited once, trying to understand how her mother became capable of such elaborate deception. The conversation didn't provide closure. Linda still maintains she was trying to secure Sarah's future, just in unconventional ways. Sarah has started dating someone new, a teacher she met through volunteer work at a literacy center. They seem happy together, and I'm genuinely glad she's found someone who appreciates her loyalty and caring nature. Those qualities made her vulnerable to Linda's manipulation, but they're also what make her a good person. The insurance companies recovered most of their money through asset forfeiture, but the emotional damage was permanent. Sarah lost not just her marriage, but her trust in her own judgment. The relationship with her mother was severed completely. Some betrayals can't be forgiven or forgotten. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd trusted my instincts earlier, if I'd questioned Linda's diagnosis from the beginning. But some lessons can only be learned through experience, no matter how painful that experience might be. Update. Writing this out has been therapeutic but also surreal. Linda will be released in less than 6 years, and I sometimes wonder if she's learned anything or just gotten better at her schemes. Would you have suspected something was wrong if your spouse's parent was diagnosed with terminal cancer but never seemed to get worse?